Here is a great mnemonic to help you remember how to get a good composition every time. It's belts.
I wish it were like photo or snaps or something.
It's not. It's
It didn't
belts.
work out that way.
BELTS, and it stands for background, edges, lighting, thirds, as in the rule of thirds,
and story. Storytelling. Let's start with the background. First, simplify your background as much as possible. Any sort of complexity or detail in the background that's not part of the story is gonna make your picture worse. Here's an example. Take a picture of Chelsea against this background. And you can see Chelsea, but there's so much detail in the background that it really distracts. So the first thing I can do to simplify the background is just to zoom my lens in. I'll just zoom in all the way. And you can see, even though neither of us moved, now she's a bigger part of the frame, so there's less background, but also the zooming in made the background overall smaller. But the background is still really complex. I can solve that by just moving to the side a little bit. So you stay there, and I'll move over here. And now this building is a much simpler background. It's still not a great picture, but by moving just to the side a little bit and zooming in, we improved it substantially.
Another way to improve your background is by simplifying it, and you can do that by blurring the background. You can get less depth of field, make your background blurrier, and it's less of a distraction. Now, if I use this 24 to 105 f4 lens, and I go wide angle at 24 millimeters and use f4, you'll see that it doesn't blur the background that much. It's distracting, and it's just very cluttered. If I zoom in more and go to 105 millimeters, then suddenly you're getting a bit more background blur. And if I get as close as I can to Tony while still being able to focus, it will blur the background even more. Your kit lens might not do a very good job of blurring the background, but you can use a inexpensive lens like this 50 millimeter 1.8 and just get close to your subject and get a lot of background blur out of that. So first I'll shoot wide. You can see that even at 1.8, it does a pretty good job, but because I'm farther away, the background isn't as blurred. So I'll get closer to Tony. Can you squat for me? I need an apple box, that's for sure. And now you can see that the background is even more blurred, less of a distraction, and more attractive.
But wait, we can blur it more. Look, I have an 85 f1.4. I'll trade you.
The 85 1.4 is a more attractive focal length for portraits, and the 1.4 offers you the shallower depth of field. To have more control over your depth of field, you can put your camera in aperture priority and then put your aperture all the way down as low as your lens will allow. And I also like to put it in auto ISO to make sure that the exposure is correct. So let's try this one.
I'll be shorter.
You can see that the 85 millimeter 1.4 is an ideal choice for blurring the background. You still have an attractive focal length, it zooms in enough to blur the background, and the depth of field is nice and shallow.
With modern cameras, almost everybody puts their viewfinder to their eye and takes a picture at eye level, but that's not necessarily the best angle. And because it's common, it's also so expected that those pictures will never be too interesting. You can change the angle of your camera, and that will drastically change the background. Moving the camera up high will cause the horizon to shift down, and moving the camera down low will cause the horizon to shift up. So put that horizon or anything in the background in an interesting location, or move the camera up and down to just hide it. I'll turn on live view on my camera, use the back screen, and I'll hold the camera up high, and you can see how different it is. I'll also get down low on the ground for a completely different picture.
We're at the E in belts, which stands for edges. Before you take your shot, check all of the edges of your frame and make sure there's nothing strange poking into your frame or you're not cutting off any joints on the people that you're photographing.
Did you see it? You probably felt it right away. It's weird that our feet are just at the bottom of the frame.
Justin, why'd you do this?
It's such an easy thing to fix. And when you do leave space around your subjects, make sure it's a roughly even amount of space. Usually, you don't want a huge amount of space to the side, but very little space below. If you are going to crop into a person's body, don't do it at the knees or the elbows, but do it between the joints. Also, watch out for stuff that pokes in from the edges of the frame, like this foot or that pole. That's bad. The L in belts stands for light, and we didn't have very good light on the day we filmed this, so I'm just going to show you some examples. The difference between hard light and soft light can dramatically change a photo. While hard light is great for wildlife, soft light is more flattering for portraits. This is hard light, and this is soft light. This is hard light, and this is soft light. On sunny days, you can change the light by putting the sun behind your subjects to keep the hard light off their faces. If you want hard light, you can wait until the sun comes out or moves to a different position in the sky. You can also use flash to add light to a scene.
Another compositional tip is the T in belts, which is thirds. So unless you're going for a very direct feeling in your photo, you want to offset the subject in your photo in one of the upper, lower, and right and left thirds of the photo. Let me show you what I mean. If I get Tony dead center in the frame, the photo lacks a sense of movement. Your eye's drawn to him in the middle, and then you're not really encouraged to look around the frame. But if I move him off to 1/3 of the frame, like this, wait for that bus to go by. Now you're looking at him, but you're also looking around the frame to get some sense of the background.
When you do move your subject outside of the center of the frame, have them facing towards the middle of the frame so they have room to move into. It's called the rule of space. Let's look at 2 pictures of me facing towards the middle and then facing towards the edge. The S in belt stands for story. Tell a story with your photos and make sure that it's obvious to the people looking at the picture, because you know what the story is because you were there. But people seeing your picture might not know that you're at a coffee shop. They might just think it's a picture of you. Think about what you're doing and what you want to share and put those elements in the final photo so that it conveys. Okay, let's take a look at some examples of storytelling in photos. This is a picture of a road and some mountains. There's no story though. Add one element and the picture now tells a story of a biker taking a trip through the mountains. This is just a picture of our cameraman. It tells you what he looks like, but doesn't have any story to it, so you don't know anything about him or what he's doing. Here's a picture of Justin that shows you what he does and the fact that he travels around to cool places. Okay, what are these people doing? The photo doesn't tell much of a story because it's missing key storytelling elements. Changing the composition to include key volleyball elements like the net and the ball told a more complete story. Here's a picture of 2 people. The photo tells you nothing about them except what they look like. Add a few storytelling elements and now you know they're DJs. Change their expressions and the story of what type of DJ they are changes too. Here's a photo of me taking pictures, but there's no story. You can't tell where I am or what I'm photographing. But what about this photo? Did showing more of the background tell a more complete story? But what about this photo? This is a picture of a cedar waxwing bird, but there's no story. Here's a photo that tells the story of the bird gathering berries on a snowy day. It's more compelling because of the additional storytelling elements. Remember, before you take a picture, recite belts in your head: background, edge, lighting, thirds and other compositional techniques, and storytelling. Include each of those elements in all of your photographs and your pictures will improve dramatically.
Edges,
Lighting,
the
rule of thirds,
and sandwiches.
storytelling.
Storytelling.